All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another IIAS Writers Series. For those of you who aren't familiar, we take the amazing authors and writers from the International Institute of Astronautical Sciences. This is a very diverse group of professionals covering the books that they have published. So in the past, we have had everything from astronomy and noctilucent clouds and northern lights observers and photographers. That was a session with Adrian Modwy. To SciComm experts. That was a session with Kelly Girardi or Nora Patton. To those who look at the ties from the celestial world to indigenous culture, and that was Dr. Dawn Marsden. So today is no different. We have a stellar individual with us. I am very pleased to bring to the stage, the virtual stage, Mr. Brien Posey. So for those of you who don't know him, Brien is incredible in so many respects. If I recall the stats correctly, so he's an expert in the IT world. He has written numerous books, articles, over 60 books to date, thousands of articles, numerous keynote presentations, and talks, as well as is a what we call a barnacle member of the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. Brien and I have been teammates within this community since 2015. Oh no, sorry, 2016. My apologies. But he has been to nearly every single class to date. We have completed everything from microgravity training on the and research on the Vomit Comet to planetary geology operations to water emergency egress operations. And for those of you who just wandered in, you heard us talking about our most recent sojourn with EVA 105, our neutral buoyancy lab. So Brien is no stranger to this world. And very relevantly, we will be talking about two of his books today from the Conversational Geek series. And we will be talking about his two books, Conversational Rocket Science and Conversational Astronaut Training. So Brien, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure, and I think I'm about to do the thing I always forget to do, is just introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Shauna Pandya. I'm a physician. I'm a member of the International Institute for Astronautical Science community as well. I've been part of this community since 2015, and like Brien, have been lucky enough to work with amazing individuals and complete nearly every course to date, and I head up the space medicine group. So this hour is all for you. We're going to be talking about Brien's books. I'll be asking him a few questions. Brien, if you don't mind, maybe I'll be sharing my screen and the covers of both of your books so people can see what it's all about. And then we'll be taking questions from the audience. So hopefully that sounds like a plan. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions. Please feel free to say hi, tell us where you're from, and let's kick it off. So Brien, tell us about your two books. The two books we'll be talking about today. They will be Conversational Rocket Science, Conversational Astronaut Training. Just give us a quick intro into what spurred those.
Sure. The first of the two books was the Conversational Rocket Science that was written before the other one. To really understand what that book is all about, you kind of have to go back to what Conversational Geek is all about. They're the publishing company that published that book. A friend of mine actually founded that company, and it started just as a way of helping some friends, oddly enough. He got tired of having friends get ripped off at, I almost said it, a rather infamous electronics store. I'm sure you can all imagine who that is. But anyway, friends of his were constantly going to this particular electronics store and getting ripped off buying computers. So he wanted to create a book that just kind of broke everything computer science related down into something really simple that the average consumer could understand so that they wouldn't get ripped off when they're shopping for computers. At the same time that he was putting that together, though, he was watching an episode of, I believe it was Big Bang Theory, and he realized that his wife, who was sitting right next to him, wasn't getting any of the jokes because she wasn't familiar with geek culture. So he decided to write this book called Conversational Geek and wanted it to be almost like a cliff note to all things geek. It was only 150 pages, but it was meant to just immerse the reader in all of the finer aspects of geek culture. And that book led to an entire series and eventually a publishing company called Conversational Geek. The idea being to take something that's really complicated and somewhat intimidating and break it down to its simplest parts so that way somebody who read the book, by the time they got done, they wouldn't be an expert in the subject by any stretch of the imagination, but they would know enough that they could at least not feel so intimidated if they were involved in a conversation on it, or if they happen to see something about it later on. So that's where conversational rocket science came from. It was published early in Conversational Geek's history, and my friend who started the company and I were talking, and he was trying to figure out what other types of topics they should cover. And I can't remember if it was my idea or his idea, but we had the idea that everybody says that, oh, it's not rocket science, implying that rocket science is the most difficult thing ever. So it seemed like the perfect topic to cover for Conversational Geek, being that rocket science is such a geeky topic. So when I wrote that book, what I wanted to do is break rocket science down into its fundamental parts, throw calculus out the window, and use nothing beyond basic high school algebra. Sorry, Ken, if you happen to be on here. and just make the topic of rocket science a bit more approachable. Incidentally, you notice the cover. It was really important to me to make sure that this book didn't take itself too seriously. My inspiration behind that cover was Roadrunner and Coyote. I told the publisher that I wanted a cover and cartoons within the book that were completely irreverent, just to make the subject less intimidating for people. Conversational astronaut
I
training
love
is
that.
also...
But to be clear, we're not talking.
Say that again?
Sorry, I was going to say, to be clear, we're not telling people how to launch their friends into space.
Yeah, in full disclosure, I did not draw any of these cartoons. A publisher or an artist in the UK did all of the artwork for this. But this was a small part of the inspiration behind the return to flight patch that Richard had come up with. But the Conversational Astronaut training book was totally different from this one, and totally different from any other Conversational Geek book. Typically, Conversational Geek books are really short. The rocket science book is under 40 pages. The astronaut training book is a lot longer, and it was just kind of my chance to tell my story about everything that I've gone through with Possum and IIAS and some of the other commercial space providers since 2015, because what we're doing is historic. The commercial spaceflight industry is brand new. I wanted to be able to tell the story from the perspective of someone who was there at the dawn of the commercial spaceflight industry, but I also wanted to tell the human side of it. So there's lots of stories interwoven in the book about all the shenanigans that go on behind the scenes and just some of the ways that we've had fun with it. And it was also super important to me to make it a warts and all kind of story. I didn't hold anything back about some of my less than stellar experiences and mistakes that I've made along the way and things like that, because I wanted to keep it all real. So that's kind of the short synopsis of the two books.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Brien. And if I may, are you okay with me just doing a quick scroll to just kind of give people a layout of the book? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say that the astronaut training book is in the process of being rewritten right now. The publisher asked me for a third edition. There's lots of new material, and I wrote the bulk of that book on an overnight flight coming home from California, so it probably doesn't have the best layout because I was in a huge hurry to meet a deadline, so I'm trying to do it right for the third edition.
How many people can say that they just, up and up write a book on a flight home?
It's amazing what you have to do when, or
And
what
I
you do
do
when
want to
there's
talk
a
about
deadline.
the writing process. That's so funny. I do want to talk about the writing process and your writing process in particular in a little bit, but let me just do a quick scroll. So this
Sure.
book, as Brien was saying, is extremely accessible. And so not only does it have these wonderful graphics, and it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, that's Kennedy Space Center that's in the background there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So they give you a quick orientation to what conversational geek is, and exactly as you say, it is a conversation. And then there's these graphics, but there's also these boxes where the author breaks the fourth wall and says, okay, but I also want to share this with you. And what I really appreciate about this book is that there are those who may or may not know is we have an orbital mechanics course as well, taught within IIAS. And the beauty of that course is the same thing, is it really thinks before you get to the math. And I've really felt that familiarity is, yeah, I don't have to, have mastered advanced calculus. You can really get the concepts and as well as the principles. And you do have the basic equations. I definitely recognize these, but they're the ultimate goal is understanding to figure out what it takes goal is
Shauna,
to
you're
launch a
breaking up
rocket to
really
space,
bad.
and you talk about the boosters and why a rocket needs several stages. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you for that feedback. I'm going to turn off my video and see if that conserves bandwidth. One sec. All right. How's this?
It's good.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay. So what I was saying is, it's really, I really appreciate how your book explains the concepts and also the why. Like, why does a rocket need several stages? And it's only just about a 30-page read, and it's a really fun read. So just exactly that, rocket science breaking it down. So well done, Brian.
Oh, thank you.
And I was also just going to say, I was typing this earlier. Feel free. I see more than a few folks have wandered in. Feel free to say hi, who you are, where you're from. And then if there's questions that come up, please feel free to type them into the chat because it's your hour. So what I want to do is I want to switch over to the other book, Conversational Training. And it's so interesting, Brien. You're anticipating my questions as they came, because I believe this was the second edition, or this was written in 2018. And even in the introduction, you talk about your path to get to space, the why of why you pursued this, and then holy cow, all of a sudden people are going to space, which is the perfect time for an addendum or a third edition. Um, do you want to just take us through kind of your experience and then writing it all down?
Yeah, like I said, the vast majority of this book was written during an overnight flight coming home from California. I was recording a video course the week leading up to it and just didn't have time to touch it, and had a publishing deadline 2 days later. So there really wasn't a lot of time invested in this one. I'm sorry to say. Typically, when I write a book, I end up dictating the vast majority of it using dictation software. This one I just typed out, and it just flowed. What you see is, even though this is a second draft, or excuse me, second edition, you're seeing it almost completely raw the way I typed it.
And part of that is actually a bonus, because one thing I appreciated is you're frank about it, you're honest, and you also share your lessons learned. So, for example, early on in the introduction, I don't think I'm giving anything away. You talk about I don't you don't want to sugarcoat anything. There's several must-haves. You need to there's a reason there's certain stringent requirements for governmental space agency astronauts. You talk about the physical fitness, you talk about the academics, you talk about the costs involved. So I think a lot of people will appreciate the candor in this. And you also talk about facing your fears, that it's not necessarily pretty and it's not necessarily comfortable. So I think that's great. And on that note, do you have any anecdotes that you want to share about times that you're like, oh, what have I got myself into?
Yeah, there have actually been several of those. Uh, one in one in particular that I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Sarah Jane. I see she's on the call. We did the sea survival together, and for whatever reason, I just absolutely hate the platform jump at survival systems, and it has nothing to do with the height. Even at home, jumping 6 inches into the swimming pool, and it's a 6 inch drop, it just freaks me out for some reason. I guess not landing on a solid surface. And Sarah Jane, the night before we were supposed to do that, she gave me this theory that if you can be completely courageous for 10 seconds, that's usually enough to initiate whatever action has to happen. And that was immensely helpful, getting me through that platform jump, because I had already been through the class once before I had gone through it with Possum. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. Probably or nope, not probably, but by far the most uncomfortable thing I've ever gone through with regard to the spaceflight training was not something I did with Possum, but something I did independently with, as it was, Astronauts for Hire at the time, motion sickness desensitization training. At NASTAR Center, they have a jet aircraft simulator they call the Gyro Lab. And basically they spend 3 days spinning you all different directions. They black out the visuals and the instruments so you don't know what direction you're spinning. And they have you do all these crazy head movements that are specifically designed to get you sick. They do a baseline flight on the first day to see how long it takes you to get sick, and then they do a repeat of that baseline flight at the end of the last day so that they can see how your tolerance to motion sickness has improved over time. And that was by far the sketchiest thing that I've done in any of the spaceflight training.
Do I love that piece of just shared from Sarah Jane, and who's here by the way. And 10 seconds of courage is all it takes. It's so funny that you mentioned that because I also, like you, not think I had any. I had any fears until I got to realized jumping from high. And I remember the first time we had to do that 10-foot platform drop. I took a few steps, took I start up the last minute. It's like you're not supposed to do this. And then again, I had to say okay, just ignore it and then just jump in. And same thing with skydiving. It's like no, you're not supposed to jump from this high, but at certain points you have to work through that. So it really has been an experience. um, you've been part of this amazing community. You've been part of the A4H, now ASP community. Do you have any insights on the teamwork and the community building and the camaraderie?
I'm sorry, it cut off on that last part. Can you say that again?
Oh, I was going to say, do you have any insights on team building and camaraderie and that community building?
Honestly, I think that that's one of the most amazing parts of the entire experience, and that's something that I worked really hard to try to capture in the astronaut training book. I don't know if I succeeded in that regard or not. Um, but I found that it's impossible to go through something as intense as spaceflight training without building some really deep connections along the way. That's a huge part of the experience. I mean, you get to work with so many great people and you're having these amazing experiences that you're sharing with them. I think the camaraderie is just a natural part of it. And then, of course, there are the occasional team building exercises. I seem to remember the Leaning Tower of Spaghetti from your course, which was awesome.
Yeah, you guys surprised me with that one. It's kind of ingenuity at every turn. Um, and it's really that community building that I think keeps people coming back, because you may be in it for the realization of this dream to go to space, but I think what I've heard time and time again is come for the space, stay for the team. um, I know early in the book you also comment on, the why that, you talk about commercial spaceflight and tourism, but also, the impetus to be more than that, be more than just a passenger. And that's something that we definitely embrace in the IIAS community. Do you want to talk about, that drive to be a contributor from a research or operational perspective in commercial spaceflight?
Yeah, sure. The bigger thing is that, from as long as I can remember as a small child, I wanted to be an astronaut. And there were a number of factors in my life that more or less ruled that out, at least from the NASA perspective, um, pretty early on. So I wanted to have a chance to recapture that. When commercial spaceflight started becoming available, I figured, I could go and buy a ticket and fly on Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin, and that would get me to space, no problem. But at the same time, it seemed somewhat unsatisfying. I wanted to see what astronaut training was really like. I wanted to see if I could measure up, if I could do what needed to be done, and just see what the entire experience was like. I didn't want to just go on a commercial space flight and be done in 10 minutes and okay, that's it. I've been to space. Check that one off the list. On to the next thing. I wanted to have a more comprehensive experience, including the training and including doing something more in space than just floating around taking selfies. As much fun as that sounds, I wanted to prove that I could actually do legitimate scientific work in space.
I think you're in the perfect community for that because I think that's a common draw for a lot of us here. Um, and so, there's there's so many directions that we can go with this conversation. I want to return to a question we'd alluded to at the very start of this, and that's talking about the writing process. And just before I get into that, I just want to remind anyone who's present that if you have any questions, just type them in, or if you're feeling, more personable, if you turn on your camera and ask yourself, just let me know, and I'll turn it over to you. So you alluded to your book writing process that usually you dictate and then or sometimes you write it all. Um, is there this period of information gathering? Do you take notes? Do you have like a wall full of sticky notes? Do you have conversations and interviews with experts and then record them? How do you do the fact finding?
It really just kind of varies depending on what it is that I'm writing. Typically, if I'm writing a technology book or one of my tech articles or something, uh, it's, and this is going to sound terrible, but it's usually written off at the top of my head. I read absolutely everything that I can get my hands on. A lot of it sticks, a lot of it doesn't. But for whatever reason, I seem to be able to formulate articles based on that. So most of the time, that's the writing process. Is I'll just throw on the headset that I'm wearing right now, fire up the dictation software, and whatever spews out of my mouth, that's the article. Um, Books, of course, are a little bit more research intensive. A lot of times I've got a gazillion browser tabs open where I'm jumping from one place to the next, just kind of figuring it out as I go along. But it, to the casual observer, it would appear extremely chaotic and disorganized, but it works.
Do you know off the top of your head, what is your record for most number of tabs open at a time?
I have absolutely no idea.
And I say this is a bit of a digression, because I once, one of my physician colleagues, she was in shock that you would ever have more than one tab open. And then this kind of sent us into this existential crisis, as to which one of us was abnormal and which one of us wasn't. Because in my mind, if you have anything less than a gazillion tabs open, you're abnormal. And so one of our other double IIS members, actually in the incoming class, he finished a literature review and took a screenshot of his 147 browser tabs open. So that's the record I've seen to date. So that's just an aside. But I firmly believe that it's impossible to have only a single tab open at a time. And I would be willing to stake my medical reputation on it that that's not normal.
I love it. I don't think my record's anywhere close to that, but what I will say is you see all the monitors behind me. What you can't see is that there's another one right there. There's several right here, one right here. So I'm usually just constantly surrounded by information.
That's awesome. So I do see a few questions coming in from the chat. Um, Sarah Jane is up first, and she's asking, as a woman on a mission to build a toolkit for artists and authors in space, um, do you imagine that dictation will suffice in space? And would your answer change for planetary mission, reporting, or publishing and sending signs of life from the lunar base camp, for example?
Okay, I missed the middle part of that. Do I imagine that dictation will what?
Be sufficient for space flight. Imagine you are writing a book from space. Will dictation be enough? Or if you're on a planetary mission and you are writing a book from the moon, will dictation be enough? And Sarah Jane, feel free to qualify that. Are you saying that would you want the author? Do you think the author would need to send back images and video as well? Feel free to qualify that. And then as an aside, while we're waiting for more info, Rui says he has 123 tabs open at the moment. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
glad to know we're amongst like-minded people. And Yvette says she splits her browsers into separate windows, which I also do. Okay, so Sarah Jane is
And
saying,
I'm just honored to be on one of Rui's tabs.
That's awesome. Okay, so Sarah Jane is saying that, imagine you're writing a book on a interplanetary mission. You're sending back this wonderful book from the moon. Would dictation be enough? Would you think that, maybe you need to augment that with multimedia, tactile writing, sketching, performance, gestures, song, etc.?
I think that everybody's writing style is different. The first thing that actually came to mind when that question came in was, would dictation work in space, which I think is a whole nother question. um, because I actually use some relatively old dictation software just because it's self-contained. It doesn't rely on the cloud, so it still works if my internet connection goes down or if it gets slow. Um, if you were using one of the cloud-based dictation software packages, I think latency would become a huge problem if you tried to dictate from space. But if you were using something self-contained like what I use, it should work. As far as whether you would need other types of media, I think what it really boils down to is the individual author's slash artist's preferences. Everybody expresses themselves in a different way. Uh, certainly I don't rely purely on text. Both of my books have figures or photographs in them. Uh, Also, I've got this pad right here that's a drawing pad, and I do quite a bit of artwork myself. And I think if I were to try to write a book from space, I would absolutely want a smaller version of that so that I could do some artwork and would want to include some photographs. So yeah, I think it just comes down to personal preference.
Thanks for that. And that's so true. Everyone has their own methods of writing, and sometimes they evolve as well. Rui says he just downloaded the Astro training book, and he had the rocket science one from 2 to 3 years ago. And that's a good point. These are available for public consumption for download, is my understanding. Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, absolutely free.
That's awesome. We'll throw the link in the chat, and hopefully we'll have a few more readers out there. I want to talk about this upcoming edition of the astronaut training book because this is so relevant. Because holy cow, this year alone, so much has changed in the commercial spaceflight world. So what do you anticipate incorporating into this latest edition?
Uh, the first thing I want to restructure it to where the flow is a little bit better, but there's so much that we've done since 2018. I know we were down for almost 2 years, but you think, as you said, everything that we've done just this year alone, and then 2019 was a huge year too. We flew a ton of parabolas on the Vomit Comet. Let's see, I'm trying to even remember. We did EVA 104, which was absolutely huge. I've already written almost 6,000 words on that alone. Uh, and then let's see, we also did Bio 104 that year. So there's just a lot that I want to augment with regard to training that we've done since the time that the book was written. Repeats of previous training exercises that I want to write a little bit more about and add some more detail that I didn't have time to cover the first time because of a deadline. And I want to talk about some of the more recent things that we've done as well.
That's awesome. And will you be sort of making a commentary on the evolution of space flight now? When the first two editions were written, we knew that Virgin Galactic, we knew that Blue Origin, we knew that the commercial providers would be flying at quote unquote some point in the future. And now, we've seen this year alone, Blue, Virgin, we've seen Inspiration 4, we've seen people go to space. Will you be, has that even crossed your mind, or is it kind of, strictly speaking to, hey, this is what I've done and this is where I've been since?
Oh no, that's absolutely planned for the book. Not so much any kind of deep commentary on any one specific mission or anything other as much as just, this is becoming a reality. People are actually flying now, and this is all the more reason why this is relevant.
Perfect. So we have a few more comments and questions in the chat. So Yvette has mentioned, for those who may not have been able to make this session or watching it after the fact, we will have a link to Brien's books on social media for a few weeks. So Yvette also asks the follow-up, what is your review and editing process like?
It varies by publisher. It also varies heavily based on deadline. If I'm writing something short, usually the first draft is the last draft. There is no review or editing process. So something like this that's fairly long, I'll usually go back and reread it at least once or twice, send it to the publisher, and there's always things I think of after I've done it, like, oh man, I wish I'd included this, that, or the other, or said something a little bit differently. But usually by that point, it's too late to do anything about it.
Fair enough. I think that's a very human thing. You walk away from a conversation and said, "Oh my God," think to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I should have said this and that." And same thing with any paper or work that you submit. So we have a few more questions. Kevin is asking, is it safe to travel to space since space debris is becoming a serious problem? What can we do to eliminate this problem? This is a very timely question, especially with the Russian anti-satellite quote-unquote test that happened last week, raining down debris on the International Space Station. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brien?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that traveling to space has never been 100% safe. To quote you, space is actively trying to kill you. Uh,
That is true.
also,
That is very true.
there's always going to be an element of risk involved. As far as orbital debris, that's always been a problem too, much more so in recent times. As far as what kind of risk it is, I honestly don't know. I'm not sure I've got a qualified opinion on that one. Maybe somebody else could weigh in on that.
And Yvette is actually weighing on this as we speak. Yvette says we have a few peers in the industry working on space debris monitoring, space situational awareness, and technology solutions. So Yvette is also asking, do you have peers internal to IIAS and external as well? And Yvette, do you mean like writing peers? Do you mean those who share that astronaut and exploration dream as well?
I was talking about the review process. Sorry, I guess I split my question into two, but what I meant is when you have the review of your writing, do you share it with Jason or somebody in the team? Do you ever bounce ideas off the team internally while we're in training?
No, not really. The only thing that I did, like in the case of the astronaut training book, was there were some stories in the book about some of the training exercises and some of the people involved. And anybody that I was mentioning by name with regard to a story, I did send them a copy of that section of the book in advance and just said, hey, is this cool with you? And got their permission. Same thing with photographs, just as a courtesy. But as far as input on the writing process, no, it's way too chaotic and spur of the moment. A lot of times I'll think it's going one direction, and then by the time I sit down to write, I'll come up with something totally different and that doesn't even resemble my initial idea.
I can confirm, Brien, you very graciously sent me the excerpt of the EVA 102 Operational Space Medicine course, my course that you took. So I did appreciate the courtesy, and it was a fun read to hear, see it through someone else's eyes.
Cool.
Rui is asking, do you know how many downloads you may have had, or how many countries your books may have reached?
I really don't know. The publisher could probably tell me if I ask them. What I can tell you is that with the astronaut training book, they arranged for me to do a book signing when it was first published down in Orlando, Florida. And Heidi Hammerstein actually went down there with me for that book signing. And early on, they had told me that there were going to be 80 people that had registered for the book signing. I don't know how many actually showed up, but it was way, way more than 80. It was probably more in the neighborhood of several hundred, but I don't even have the number count for that.
That's fantastic. Yvette is asking, how many books are you writing at a time?
At the moment, I'm working on 3 simultaneously. Typically, I try to do one at a time, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Enough. And I see another question is just rolled in through the chat. Kevin is asking, do you think the Artemis program to the moon in 2024 will create a permanent human settlement on the moon? And will it eventually lead to a sustainable lunar economy? Ooh, I love these questions. I'll let you digest that for a second. So looking at the long-term prospect of lunar exploration and beyond.
Yeah, I guess I would answer that question by saying I hope so. I think there probably will. It's kind of funny. My brother gives me a hard way to go about all of this. All of the permanent settlement on the moon and in low Earth orbit, and tells me that, I've gone through all of these years of this stuff, and what I'm going to eventually end up being is a glorified construction worker assembling all this.
It's so funny. So that's me because she wanted to tell me that. So I'm gonna laugh and I'm gonna watch Space Force. But it's hilarious because the electricians and the welders, because that's what you need. And it was lucky enough to take a trip to Biosphere, those amazing posters that they, specifically farmers wanted. So it's really cool to think about the future of human action. And what are your thoughts on this? Because my sense is we're at this inflection point, just as we were with the Apollo era. Activity.
Are you there?
I think we lost Shauna's sound for good. Shauna, is your mic? Well, let's see if she'll use her phone
Yeah.
to call in. She was making a few references to Space Force, and I think all the relevance of all the skills are going to be needed. But Sarah, do you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah.
Well, now I hear Shauna. Sarah
Hey,
Jane,
I'm back. So sorry about that. Yeah, let's
okay.
go to Sarah Jane, and then I'll come back to my question.
Well, she says she can't talk, but you can ask her question for her.
Sure. Which question is that? I thought I was up to date on all the questions unless I've missed a recent one. Oh, she's in bed. It's 4 a.m. Okay. So the question I wanted to ask is, we have seen a flurry of activity this year alone when it comes to commercial space, and my sense is we're at this inflection point of humans in space, but also we kind of were at this point in the 60s and 70s with the Apollo mission where we thought, hey, we've got 12 people on the moon and counting. By the 2020s, we will have a sustainable moon economy and we'll be commuting to the moon for work. Do you spend time thinking about, what the threats and the opportunities are to continue this momentum versus what could stall it? Is that something that kind of enters your very busy periphery of thinking?
Maybe only at a very light level. The last Apollo mission ended before I was born, and from what I understand, it ended up drying up just because Congress cut the funding on it. Somebody at the Johnson Space Center was telling me that they actually had 3 more Saturn V's ready to go, and Congress wouldn't pay for the gas to send them up. Hence the reason those particular vehicles are sitting in museums today. I think we're probably going to see something a little bit different going forward, just because the private sector is involved. And assuming that commercial spaceflight is successful and that there are profitable operations that can happen on the moon, no commercial company is going to want to make a huge investment in commercial space and then just end up cutting ties and running after making that massive investment. So I think we are going to see something that lasts a bit more long term.
Yeah, that's my hope, and I think it's a critical time for the space humans in space from both the commercial and the exploration class mission perspective. Sarah Jane has a question. She is asking, what kind of research or operations would you like to be involved in or initiate and lead during your space mission or missions?
Oh, I don't know. And Sarah, thank you for tuning in at such an insane hour. I don't know. If I had my choice, probably something tech related or robotics related, just because that's what I've done all of my life. But I'm not picky. I would do whatever gets me up there.
That's a great, that's the attitude really. You need to be able to be, master of one trade, but also jack of all trades. Kevin is asking, is it possible to buy property on the moon or Mars through the Lunar Embassy or an intergalactic government through the process of space law that was agreed upon by the UN? I'm not sure if this is quite within your domain, but feel free to comment, Brien.
I did hear about a real estate firm a few years back that was selling property on the moon. I don't know how legit that is, if the people that are purchasing those parcels on the moon have any legal claim to it, or if it's just a snake oil scam. But apparently somebody's doing it.
My understanding is the latter, as I don't think by the Outer Space Treaty anyone can currently lay claim to interstellar property. But the double IIAS community is coming to our rescue and is posting some interesting links in the chat. Rui's just posted lunarland.com. And Yvette has just posted the November 2021 NASA Management of the Artemis mission, hot off the press. And then Sarah Jane is pointing out US didn't ratify this, so to be determined. And also, as we know, it's not just the US is going to the moon. I know that Russia and China signed an agreement for a polar lunar base together. So it's an interesting time in international exploration of the moon. Erin is asking, what operating system would you use on the moon? I'm going to tease you and say it's going to be a Mac, isn't it? Please don't tell anything.
Those fighting words. What operating system would I use on the moon? I would say it depends on the use case. What's it being used for? You know, I'm a 20-time Microsoft MVP. Of course, I'm going to say Windows, but realistically, I would probably want to use, if it's not for general purpose computing, I would probably want to use a hardened Linux kernel that has been specifically built for that particular purpose, just because we're talking about fewer lines of code and something that's better documented. Anytime that you are able to shrink a code base, that code by definition becomes more secure and more stable just because you've reduced complexity. So that's probably the way I would go for anything other than just general computing.
And Sarah Jane is suggesting the very appropriate operating system name of Lunatics 2.0. Love it. And then for those who are in the chat, please check it out. There is a flurry of links and articles related to the real estate question. And Yvette is saying that as long as the OS is 6G, so that's right, connectivity on the moon will be an issue. So while we're talking about next generation, work on the moon, I want to talk about next generation writing on the moon. That brings it full circle to Sarah Jane's initial question. What's really cool about writing and publishing and teaching in this day and age is there's multiple media through which to do it, and you make use of some of these in your books. Not only do you use graphics and do you use these little side panels, you're very good about posting relevant links. Do you see this evolving to embrace like QR codes that can, send you immediately to a link of interest, or creating a parallel app that can, create an augmented reality display or a little pop-up a video? Like, has that ever entered your thought or writing process?
Honestly, I never even thought about it. One of the things, though, is that every publisher has standards for their book series. They want all of the books that are published within a particular series to have a similar look and feel. So they're very particular about what types of elements they'll allow you to include. So it could be that a publisher would nix something like that unless they're prepared to roll it out for the entire series.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. It's really interesting thinking about the thought process of what it's like to type in space, because on the moon you're typing in 16G, so I wonder how much more cognizant you have to be about the force or lack thereof, or increased force you're using on those keystrokes, and also the lunar. Go ahead.
That's actually an interesting question, because it reminds me of something I was writing last night. I mentioned that I was including some stuff about EVA 104 in the next version of the Conversational Astronaut training book. And one of the things that I noticed in EVA 104 was that the first task that I had to do in the simulated 1/6 gravity was to break a chip off of a boulder. And whenever I would swing the hammer, I noticed that I was hitting the rock, but it was also kind of knocking me back a little bit just because of the gravity offset system that we were using. So I kind of wonder if you weren't restrained, if you would get a similar experience typing in 0G or in 16G.
Absolutely, and even also needing to mitigate that lunar dust, which can definitely clog up the keyboard. And
yeah,
yeah, something you don't want to get inside the airlock. Yvette is saying this is where dictation comes in, and Sarah J, typing underwater, even touchscreen usage differs. Getting another question. So Kevin is asking, how can we make STEM education and astronaut training more accessible to young aspiring astronauts?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. that's part of what I was attempting to do with the rocket science book, is do what I could to make this subject a lot more approachable. But I'm not sure that I've got the best answer to that.
Yvette's reading my mind. If only there were some outreach organizations who also specialized in that. So for those of you who are wondering what we're alluding to, is we're very serious about this, not just through books, which Brien's book, take a look at it. It's very digestible. It really accomplishes that. But, also elevating folks who may not have had that ability to traditionally partake in space. And I think that's why your book is so great, because it talks about, well, this is why I may not have qualified by NASA, but these are the challenges that apply regardless. So this is what I did. And then, to take it one step further at IIAS, we're really passionate about that. And we have dedicated outreach programs that look at exactly that. We have Possum 13, which aims to promote careers to women and underrepresented groups. We have Out Astronaut, promoting the opportunities of the LGBT community. We have Space for All Nations, Rui is chair again, increasing opportunities for emerging space fair nations. And you know what? I think I'm forgetting one. Oh, all three. Ha. I'm imagining one that doesn't really. I've put the link in the chat. Yeah, so this is really the perfect station, because accessibility seems to be the universal theme here, and it's uh, again, if you haven't read Brien's book, please take a peruse. It's free for download, and it's a conversation. You can envision yourself being at a cocktail party and just meeting someone like Brien and discovering what he's having that conversation. So it really is a cool look into that. It's wondering any other languages or in audio?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I have had publishers that have released books in other languages, and they never tell me about those things.
Perfect. So as we wind down to the last 8 minutes here, feel free to ask more. And Brien, are there any other space relevant topics that you haven't published on yet?
No, not really. The bulk of what I write is technology related. The space stuff that I've written, it's just kind of when I find time, which is not all that often.
Yeah, I'm all that you do, and amazed at your ability to output, this with such regularity. So it's definitely inspired to be doing more writing. So thank you for that. Brien, I wanted to work together for a decade, and you ask you and I have Kate. We've learned a lot of lessons about teamwork and, being part of a functional team. Do you have any lessons that come to mind that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I guess the biggest lesson that I can think of with regard to working as a part of a team in some of these training exercises that we've done is just communication. Knowing what the other person is going to be doing and why. That seems to make such a huge difference on some of these. Things can go bad fast if you don't communicate what you're doing and your thought process and all that. I guess the best example I can think of off the top of my head is during, I think it was Bio 104, the Advanced Spacecraft Egress. One of the years we were doing the capsule egress and climbing into the raft, and whoever was in before me actually disconnected the boarding ladder. And in their mind, that made sense. In my mind, that made it impossible to get in. That's one of those things that could have been better communicated ahead of time. But on the flip side, I can think of plenty of times when there was communication about things ahead, and it caused things to go much better than they otherwise would have, because myself and the other person were able to kind of brainstorm and come up with an even better plan than what either of us could have come up with on our own.
I think that's a great insight, because so much of what we do is maintaining that, as they say in the military, keeping your head on a swivel and looking for ways that potential dangers that weren't identified beforehand, and also thinking about the ways to make things better, which is a very core part of what we do. within this community. So there's so many lessons learned and so many adventures that we look forward to continuing within this community.
Yeah, and
There's a
Shauna, one
question
thing that I
about
would
space. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just one thing that I would add to that lessons learned is just be willing to listen to everybody else too, because we have a lot of smart people and some great ideas. One of the big things that I've done with a lot of the Possum missions is set up all the cameras. And I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times Aaron or somebody else has said, hey, what if we have a camera right here? And a lot of times it's something I've never even thought of, and it ends up being a really great idea.
Absolutely. And your prowess and your willingness to bring all of this technological augmentation to all of our courses. It's been such a great way of capturing the history of our program, of our courses, of what we do, either in microgravity, with a whole bunch of other courses. You brought your ROV to our underwater neutral buoyancy lab last month, and it's just it's added that much more to what we're able to do. So thank you for that.
Oh,
Yvette's
happy to
saying
do it.
you are our knowledge management system. Great. So we are wrapping up here. Brien, you've added to our program in so many dimensions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.